Welcome to another edition of News Bites here on Daily World Television. My name is Kal Korff and I'm your host. In the United States of America, ObamaCare is about to be repealed by the Republicans. When American President Donald Trump ran for the White House, which he eventually won, he repeatedly told the American people and the world that Obamacare was broke, that it was a disaster, that it ended up not delivering and living up to its promises. And then he promised the American people and the world, especially Americans again, that he would replace it after repealing it. He also said that it would be cheaper for many Americans, and basically that it would be repealed and then replaced by something that was much better. Did Trump keep his promise? Was he lying? Was he telling the truth? Well, the jury remains out on that issue because nothing official has been released yet. However, because the Trump administration and the current Trump government and Congress and the Senate spring more leaks than a boat with 1,000 holes in it, what is coming out about what is known about the Republicans are intending to do is a disaster. In other words, compared to the current state of Obamacare, what the Republicans are proposing to replace it is far worse. Now let's back up a few years in the history of this issue of Obamacare. We must remember that universal health care was a signature item that then candidate Barack Obama ran for president on. The message of having universal affordable health care, keyword is affordable, decent health care, for most Americans was a message that resonated with most voters. Most Americans believe that health care, done right, should be basically a universal right. It is a universal right in Europe, who often does health care right. I know that speaking from firsthand experience because I lived in Europe for 10 years before coming to India some 7 years ago. So I have been the beneficiary of health care done right, seeing firsthand and in person how wonderful and efficient the European system is versus the joke of what passes for healthcare in America. Now, this was before Obamacare and even after. Now, let's keep in mind that when Obamacare was passed by the Congress and signed into law, not a single Republican voted for it. The reason they didn't vote for it is because Republicans, as a rule, don't believe in the right to universal health care. In other words, health care, in their opinion, is your business and nobody else's. If you can't afford it, too bad, you die. If you can, then you pay for what you get. So the Republicans have never been for universal health care. They just don't care about human beings. I'm being very blunt about this issue. Now, having said that, and noting and reminding everybody that the Republicans, not a single one of them voted for Obamacare. It wasn't because they thought this particular implementation was flawed. They just were stuck in their party of no mentality, which ironically the Democrats have become now. The tables have turned. When Obamacare was passed into law, Obama, the Democrats controlled all levers of power, the Senate, the Congress, the White House. They had a supermajority, and they could basically get pretty much everything they wanted done. They didn't do enough, but that's typical of the Democrats. And within a couple of years, they lost their supermajority because most Americans quickly realized that the direction of the country, in their mind, was heading in the wrong direction. So now Donald Trump is president. He has beaten Hillary Clinton, much to the shock of the la-la left-wing liberal media, and of course those Democrats who just couldn't be bothered to vote. Had they bothered to vote, the ones that were eligible, Hillary would be in the White House today instead of Donald Trump. This is the same problem that the Democrats suffered from in the previous election when they lost the Senate, when about 66% of them who could have voted just couldn't be bothered to do so. Then they bitch about why they lost the Senate. That's the Democrats for you. So now the Republicans are proposing this. They are proposing tax credits to Americans to subsidize their health care. However, there's a key important difference here. Instead of basing the tax credit on your income, the Republicans are proposing to base it on your age. So if you are poor and you are young, you are screwed. If you are old and you are poor, you'll do better. This is an inhumane, indecent, immoral act. How dare the Republicans or any party take away an existing right? The only reason that the Republicans are even dealing with health care, trying to replace it with something that is really half-assed, is because tens of millions of people are on Obamacare, whether they like it or not. They have no choice. It is effectively a tax on the American people upheld by the Supreme Court. It is a tax, not an option. If you don't pay it, the IRS will penalize you. That's another key difference in the Republicans' version of this. If you don't want this new health care program, let's call it Trump Care or Trump Care Less, it's okay. You don't have to pay for it. You don't get penalized. It's up to you. This basic idea destroys the very concept of universal health care. But the Republicans, because they don't care about health care, they're of course determined to destroy it, or at least pass enough of something to replace Obamacare so they can try to fool people and say, well, look what we did. We passed an alternative. Yeah, as in something from an alternative universe. Let's be very blunt about this issue. Whether it's Democrats or Republicans, the American health care system remains screwed up. America has one of the most expensive healthcare systems in the world, and it is out of control, and it is ridiculous. The same medicines that you can buy in India cost a minimum of 10 times more in the United States. And this is not explainable just because of the currency exchange rates of 67 rupees, roughly, to $1. Instead, this is explained by mismanagement, out of control lobbying by big pharma, big insurance, and big food, who years ago, decades ago, in fact, in the 1970s, got together to collude to go ahead and change the American system so that within a generation or two, it would produce people who would live longer, but would be on insurance and would become permanent medical patients. We must remember that half of America, over half, takes some sort of antidepressants. That's why there was a best-selling book years ago called Prozac Nation. What does that say about any country, especially one with some 320 million people, when over half of its population are obese and they're on meds? What does that tell you? It tells you that this is a recipe for disaster and that it is a evil, arguably immoral way for a handful of very big companies to make a lot of money hooking people up to be permanent patients for the rest of their lives. And yes, they'll live longer, but somewhere in a hospital bed or on some sort of medical treatment, always having to buy drugs, always having to buy meds, always having to buy therapy. You're hooked just like a drug user, even though you may have done nothing wrong. With obesity and diabetes and heart attacks and a lot of these other self-induced health conditions in the American lifestyle, this is a disaster that is already hitting, and it can't continue like this. But unless somebody stops it, goes back to the beginning, analyzes and redoes things from top to bottom, it will never change. It will in fact get worse, much worse, before it gets better. I'm predicting, going on the record now for what it's worth, is saying it will never get better. We will never do healthcare in America the right way, which is really the way that the Europeans long ago figured it out, because again, the lobbyists and vested interests control our government, the United States, and basically with the Trump administration, let's be blunt, it's now American oligarchs versus Russia's oligarchs. That's the way it is, and the human race and the American people are not better off for it. Let's be blunt. Thanks again for joining us for another edition of News Bites here on Daily World Television. My name is Kal Korff and I'm your host. We'll be back again with another episode shortly.